All right, everyone, we're gonna get restarted. Our audio is online.
This new camera view too.
Okay,
Ready? Oh, it looks better.
I know.
I'll add 10 seconds because we don't know,
Yeah, I can't remember where that. Ready? Hi again.
Hi.
Do I go?
Yeah, go for
Okay,
it.
sorry. Yeah, so my problem is kind of with the process. March 25th, we had some statements that were made by some of the task force members. It was a real concern by the community because this map came out of nowhere. And I think that's what started this whole snowball that's turned into where we're at today. Was come out of them statements. There was advice from the city's attorney's office that it was a violation of the Voting Rights Act. As task force members were saying, we broke the law probably, but we're going to do it anyway. And it turned into a whole thing. And I think that's where the whole League of Women Voters thing came from. Honestly, I think that was at the core of what started this snowball. But I have to say that for me, the real problem has just been the process as a whole. And so I think this is an opportunity that maybe we can start talking about what was wrong with the process. Because it's been kind of a mess and the community has been, it's been like this back and forth. And we have to do better as a city and we have to figure this out so that we don't do this again. And also I think that this deadline is sort of an artificial deadline and now we're rushing to a deadline with this messed up process and we started late. And I'm going to kind of ask that maybe the thing we need to do is more time. Let's not rush to this deadline.
Thank you so much for your comment. Your time.
Let's get it right. Let's get it right.
Hi, members of the commission. My name is John Dunbar. I'm an 18-year resident, District 5. And what brings me here is a concern that there was this 48-hour U-turn. A district that was recognizable became like a jigsaw puzzle. Communities that had been, whole for their existence, like Japantown, were cut in half. And I think people want to look at this moderate or progressive prism, but for representation, knowing where your district is, knowing the neighbors you can reach out to affect issues that affect your community is very important. And I think the fact that this task force waited so late in this process because they have been meeting for months, I think that is what has been most unsettling. It's not like they just discovered it was hard a week ago, but they only disclosed these to the public, at the last minute. And on the core issues of whether Bayview should be with Potrero Hill, which it should be if we're interested in African-American representation of the Board of Supervisors, they're making very critical decisions very late in the process, and they're not disclosing why that is. So I hope that, this somehow we can get through this and people are happy with the lines. There's been some adjustments to District 5, but I don't see the community interest between Tenderloin and the Fillmore neighborhood or the 8. I think that's what's happened to District 5 is terrible. And, I think these lines will not have legitimacy going forward, given how this particular task force has, met its charge or not met. All right, thanks.
Hi there. My name is David Brockman. I'm a political science professor at UC Berkeley, live in San Francisco, although I'm speaking here in my personal capacity, although also thinking about my training as a political scientist and as a political science professor. I oppose removing members of the commission, and I'd like you to kind of zoom out from this particular hearing to think about, some of the important reasons why that is. And in particular, think about what this would mean for the future of the redistricting commission and the future of this commission. In particular, I'd like you to think about if you do decide to remove the commissioners, 10 years from now, a supervisor comes to members of the commission, tries to do something they're not supposed to do, try to lobby them to change their district. And that member of the independent commission knows they're not supposed to listen to what that supervisor is saying if it's especially rooted in just purely political motives. But then they have to think, well, what about happened a decade ago? What if I don't do what the supervisor wants, as I know I'm not supposed to, but this supervisor works with their allies to try to get this commission to try to remove me? It will create a mechanism by which all of a sudden members of this independent commission will be essentially de facto accountable to supervisors and accountable to all of you, which brings me to this body. I think this body doesn't want to become a de facto second redistricting commission. But in practice, I think if you remove these commissioners, that is what you are inviting. 10 years from now, there will be a playbook. If this vote is not unanimous to reject this today, there will be a playbook and a pathway people see to come before this body and treat it like a second redistricting commission. I don't think that would be healthy for this body. I think in part because if you think about this body long-term, there's a lot of other decisions that people might be tempted to come before this body to say, for example, there's a close supervisor election. We think that's because there was a polling place that opened an hour too late by mistake. Now we want to come before this commission and ask you to put pressure on, for example, DOE staff to try to not count certain votes or change things. I don't think you want to invite that kind of meddling in the process of redistricting or in this commission. And I think you have to send a strong signal that you won't stand for it today, or you will invite that for the future of the city. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, commissioners. I'm calling in opposition to this frantic 11th hour recall attempt. The task force has been doing an admirable job under impossible circumstances, and accusations of bias in these new maps are patently false. Population growth in District 6 has created a giant geographic vacuum, and I don't think most of the political establishment in the city, including those who have been commenting every meeting, have really internalized this. I've been listening to the meetings, and frankly, I don't think most of the task force really internalized this, or else they wouldn't have spent so many hours this close to the deadline trying to make Map 4D work. The task force has learned the hard way that a lot of change needs to happen, and it's time the political establishment in the city accept that instead of working the referees at the 11th hour. One of the commissioners hours ago suggested that it looks like only one side of the political divide is bearing the brunt of this change. This is misleading. That side just happens to benefit the most from the status quo because they have more incumbents this cycle. The task force is legally prohibited from considering this. Many people poured their hearts out electing the current District 5 supervisor. Yes, it seems strange and unfortunate that this district needs to change so much just because the districts to the east need to shrink and the districts to the north and west need to grow. They're entirely justified to be heartbroken that all of their hard work will be for naught because the new supervisor will most likely not win in the new District 5. However, before accusing the task force of bias, please consider that had his opponent won that mayoral race in 2019, she too would also not be able to win in this new District 5, even if she were doing wrongs. On the other side, can anyone here honestly say that the District 2 supervisor is happy to lose Seacliff and Russian Hill, but gain part of NOPA? Political establishments everywhere benefit the most from the status quo. Unequal population growth means that big changes are unavoidable, and that is why you see this frantic lashing out by organized political interests. The task force is required by law to ignore them, so should you. Shame on the commission for undermining the important work of this voluntary task force by elevating these naked establishment smears in a formal meeting. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm here to support the task force in its ability to work independently without interference. We've heard a lot from people who have their specific complaints with the map, and as many of the commissioners have said, we all know that there is no way of making a map that everybody is happy with. To the extent that factions and interest groups use advocacy and argument to promote their own interests, that is all right and good. To the extent that factions are using strong-arm tactics and outsized power to try to influence the political decisions of the task force, that is illegitimate and that is shameful. I'd like to echo Mr. Wong's earlier comment that if this commission does find that the task force has been acting appropriately, that it issue a positive statement to that effect. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Linden, and I've lived here for 16 years, mostly in Western Soma. And honestly, I've been pretty unhappy with a lot of the maps that I've seen. Many of them like literally split my neighborhood in two. Sometimes I'm looking at them and I'm like, I'm not sure what these guys were thinking. But that all being said, like, as I'm sure that you will understand, this is a process where inevitably there will be some areas that get split from each other. You know, there have to be boundaries that change, and that's really just what happens when one district grows dramatically more than the others. And that's the whole reason why we've designed this process like this, to insulate it from political influence, because to do otherwise would just capture the process to would open it up to regulatory capture by political narrow specific interests. And while I think the process hasn't always been pretty, I do think it's been working as it was designed to, with different stakeholders appointed by different groups in order to take all perspectives into account. They've heard hours and hours of public comment every day this week. So I urge you to reject this, frankly, kind of dangerous call to harm our democratic institutions here. Thank you.
Good evening, Commission. My name is Christian. I am from District 4, and I just wanted to come up and say really quickly, first of all, thank you all for taking all the time here today to listen to everyone's complaints. And I just want to remind everyone what this meeting is actually about, which is the removal of 3 members. And a few of you on the board here said that if you could listen to the other side to hear what they had to say about the removal of those members. And I want to remind all of you that all 3 of them said that they do not support the removal. They have no comment on it. They have no actual stance. So after that, I feel like that should have been enough. I know everyone here has public comment, but at the end of the day, this particular meeting isn't about maps. It's about the removal of 3 members who have just been doing their job. Thank you all for taking the time. I appreciate all of your work.
Thank you and good evening. I was going to say good afternoon, but here we are right now. My name is Mick Del Rosario and I am a resident of District 6. I'm Filipino American. I grew up in South Market, went to Bessie Carmichael Elementary School and lived in the city here for 28 years, where I'm still in South Market to this day. And I'm here before you to implore you not to remove your own vetted members of the appointed redistricting task force. These are appointees that have been working tirelessly for months to hear from everyone. And your appointees have been through a public and thorough vetting process. The Elections Commission spent months selecting these 3 qualified candidates and through a grueling application process and interview. And out of a pool of 3,000 applicants, that's a lot of vetting that needs to be done. And this isn't, as other speakers have mentioned before, this isn't about what map works or doesn't work. It's about raising the concern and pushing it back against the attacks of the character of these 3 members. Based on what I've heard from some of the folks, based on this meeting and previous meetings as well, it makes it sound like they're some kind of Disney supervillain or something like that. But they're not. The fact is that these are 3 volunteers who gave months, days, and hours of their time and are people of good character. They're doing their best, given with the kind of work that they're working with. And I agree with several of the speakers here today that the process and accessibility to these meetings need to be done better. But when we vilify the people instead of the process, that's when we start losing confidence in the institution. We're concerned about this last minute change to overturn the work that task force has done over these past couple of months. But we want to make sure that this task force is still independent as it is to this day, because I'm sure no one is really choosing to stay up until 3 in the morning. So please, thank you. Please keep them on board.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Sun. I'm a resident of District 1. I want to tell you that I am very disappointed and quite concerned about 3 organizations who have spent decades building a reputation for being a fair and open watchdog for a fair election. And they've allowed a rush to judgment to call before you questions that they really basically didn't even investigate. And you, as the Election Commission, decided that you too were going to rush to judgment to call into question 3 extraordinarily competent, considerate, and dedicated San Francisco citizens. It's unheard of for you to have done that. If you were concerned about redistricting, you should have held an informational hearing maybe 3 weeks ago to make certain that the process was moving along. But instead, you led yourself to be called upon by 3 organizations, one of which I supported since its infancy, to call into question the integrity of 3 competent and extraordinarily considered individuals. I find that to be appalling. I don't believe that you should have held this on the integrity of these individuals. The other night, the RTV voted 8-1 to move forward with a map. 8-1, because they gave up certain kinds of areas. They have listened to the community. They've considered the community. They've worked endless hours to make certain that the marginalized communities and the districts were whole, but they were given an incredible hand where 30% of the population in new housing was in District 6, and they needed to move it. And people have made sacrifices. to call into question the integrity of the individuals that you vetted and you put into that task force is unconscionable, and you should not do that. Thank you very much.
Good evening, commissioners. I have a difference of opinion. My name is Sandra Lee Fewer, and I want to thank you for hosting this meeting. I do think it has been helpful, and I do think it lends for a more transparent process in this very contentious subject. What this hearing did show was that the Elections Commission takes integrity in its duty seriously to ensure a fair election, as you are sworn to do. For those of us who requested this meeting, I think we wanted to have your assurance that you're indeed paying attention to the actions of your appointees. As a past elected official, I know that hearings should be held, and this is the power of a commission, that you're able to hold hearings when requested by the public in order to add and lend transparency to a process that people are having difficulty with, and it is your job to do so, and so I commend you for doing that. What I want to say is that we have heard a lot about people being disenfranchised by this process. What I think you're hearing from letters and from other these organizations to vilify these organizations that have been stewards in our community is just simply wrong. I just want to say that it is not about just being disenfranchised from this process currently or in the past. It is about being a marginalized community, being disenfranchised from the history of our society here in San Francisco. And this is why comments are so personal. This is why comments are taken so seriously. And I think it is right that you ask your appointees and hold them accountable. As when I was a supervisor, we held city departments accountable too, to serve the public, because actually you are the ones that are supposed to ensure that. What I hope never to see again is in your commission room, 50 senior citizens that are Chinese monolingual speaking. They've been organized to come speak here, and yet no one asked for translation. I think, and yet they wear
Thank you so much.
a sticker that says, stand for democracy. For whom?
Much for your
We
comment.
are people. We are not to be used. We are not props. We have minds and we have souls. We are not just to warm seats.
Thank you.
And done.
We have another speaker.
Ladies and gentlemen of the Elections Commission, my God, it's been a long day. Thank you for being our captive audience. Thank you for hearing us out. Really appreciate it. My name is Forrest, and I, unlike our last speaker, am a person who lives in San Francisco. I live in DuBose Triangle. I'm an Asian community activist. And for me, stopping Asian hate comes with many solutions, but one of them is fair Asian representation. I am so grateful that we have Lily Ho, Jeremy Lee, and Kaisel Lee on the redistricting task force. And I have had the pleasure of getting to know Kaisel personally, standing by his side at community events that were designed to stop Asian hate. I've met Kaisel after a long session at redistricting and seen the blood, sweat, and tears he puts into his work. I'm here today to tell you that any attempt to silence Kaisel Lee is an attempt to silence me. For Kaisel Lee represents me, and he represents my community. And Ditka represents her community. And Raynell represents his community, and together we make San Francisco. They have put months of work into a job that is thankless and as difficult as the job that you have before you today. Any emergency meeting haphazardly put together, lack of process to remove them is a direct violation to the rights we have as San Franciscan, to the rights we have as Democrats to have people represent us. Ladies and gentlemen of the Elections Commission, please do
Thank you
not
so much for your time.
remove Kaisel, Ditka, and Raynell. Thank you.
Members of the Commission, President Bernholtz, I'm Angela Calvillo. I'm the clerk of the Board of Supervisors. Hello. There were two questions that were asked earlier. One, I think, was by the president. She asked if there was an opportunity to be able to track the members of the public and their comments. And I would like to say, yes, the clerk of the redistricting task force is John Carroll. He is pretty amazing, and he is tracking comments one way or the other, if there's a map that somebody is supporting or what their specific comments were, so we can say yes. There was also the question about additional meetings, the possibility. Aside from the time frame, obviously, that DCA can talk to you about more fully. I would like to say the specific question about whether or not we can meet on Tuesday, that would not be possible because, as you know, I am the clerk for the Board of Supervisors and they meet on Tuesdays, and it is that team that is helping the redistricting task force. So that would not be our team that could support a Tuesday meeting. And then I also want to just add very quickly that more broadly, support for the redistricting task force. We actually do need to have a conversation around that to future-proof it. We are creating a report, as you'll hear from the redistricting task force itself. And the clerk's office will have a chapter in terms of how to not only better clerk the task force, how outreach should be run, and how language access is, which obviously is a major component of your thoughts around how to future-proof the task force. But we will also have some recommendations. I just want to say we have a very good partnership with Adrian Pond, the director of OSEA. That's the Office of Community Engagement and Immigrant Affairs, in addition to John Arndt. So the three of us probably, you might hear from the three of us together at a future meeting because there's a lot of work that went into the existing task force and the production of the.
Clerk Calvillo, I'm sorry to cut you off. You may elevate her as a panelist because she's representing a city department, trying to provide you information of the questions that you asked. So if you wish to do that, you can extend her time.
Please, we'll elevate you to panelist.
Finish my statement. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Just to indicate that there is a huge chasm to gap, to bridge, but it's not because there weren't great actors who were all helping to assist with that. I think that we will be creating with the task force and with your assistance to assist the Campaign and Governmental Conduct Code, which is the authorizing legislation that involved the clerk's office, so that we can assist you with your report to future-proof this from these kinds of concerns. So look forward to that conversation. Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. I have a question. Thank you for coming to answer our questions. It's really unfortunate that the Board of Supervisors meets on Tuesday and that just coincides with the 72-hour deadline. So that sounds like that's an issue with the redistricting task force not having independent staff and reliant, of course, on resources that they don't control. I also heard, and I wonder if you can verify that we are out of contract with the line drawers and have exceeded the contractual number of meetings that were agreed to.
Through the chair, I am not familiar with the specifics of the Q2 contract provisions. Thank you.
Madam Clerk, I have a question, and you may or may not be able to answer it, so there's no pressure to one way or the other. But since you're here, it's been stated to us in public comment that the deadline stated in the San Francisco Charter, it's 13.110, I believe, I probably have that wrong, which states that this process needs to be completed before April 15, that is just the deadline. And why there have been questions as to whether that deadline needs to be met. Does your office or the Board of Supervisors take a position that that deadline does not need to be abided by?
Through the chair. The clerk's office would not take a position. We would refer those legal questions, obviously, to the city attorney's office.
Thank you.
Of course, we would work diligently to meet that deadline, say. Thank you to the members.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other in-person Commenters? No, okay, then, Martha, I believe we are now switching to our WebEx, members of the public.
Okay, we have 23 persons with their hands up, and I will unmute the first caller. The name on the introduction is Grant. I will unmute you now, and you have 2 minutes to comment.
Hello, hi, this is Grant Ingram. I'm a District 1 resident with my wife and 2 daughters. Commissioners and fellow San Franciscans, this hearing was a huge mistake. We love to accuse the right wing of not respecting the democratic process, but it seems that San Francisco is not immune from that behavior either. Many of our leaders, including sadly today, the local ACLU and the League of Women Voters, have tried to pander to their constituents instead of telling the truth, which is that the primary mandate in this redistricting process is creating equal representation. Above all other considerations, that means making each district as even in population as possible within a small accepted range. Responsible leaders, including the local ACLU and League of Women Voters, should have done more to educate San Franciscans that given the huge imbalance due to population growth on the east side, major changes to the map were inevitable and necessary. But rest assured, all citizens would be represented, and that change is good because we all want San Franciscans to have equal representation. Apparently, that kind of civic duty to educate the public is not prioritized over maintaining power and influence. Check out the League of Women Voters website. It has a redistricting explained webpage, but it doesn't contain any information about the significant challenge facing this task force to rectify the imbalance. Yes, preserving communities of interest is a goal in the redistricting process, but maintaining a community of interest cannot equal and certainly not outweigh the mandate to create contiguous districts equal in size. Even the League of Women Voters website concedes that the term communities of interest is not defined in the San Francisco Charter, and the definition in the California Constitution is vague and very open to interpretation. And of course, there's no consensus on which community of interest is more important than the other. Just because a proposed map is not lining up in a way agreeable to certain residents, or a proposed map is perceived to negatively impact a community of interest, that does not mean that commissioners are biased or unethical. Listening to
Caller,
today's—
you have reached your 2-minute limit.
Okay, thanks for listening to me.
Thank you. Also, if I can remind all callers, if you've already commented, if you could lower your hand so I'm not confused about who has and hasn't. Thank you. I am now unmuting David Elliott Lewis. You have 2 minutes to comment.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Commission. So David Elliott Lewis, nearly a 4-decade San Francisco resident. Sorry, let me turn that down. And I'd like you to really look at the facts of the situation regarding this task force, the 3 commissioners you appointed to the redistricting task force. They're all fine, upstanding individuals, but they've really failed in their duty to listen to the community, to listen to especially vulnerable communities, and to consider the needs of our residents. It's not just one person, one vote. That's the bare minimum standard. We also need to prevent gerrymandering, and the maps that they've been considering have increasingly been just that, favoring conservative supervised rural voting districts, disadvantaging progressive ones. And when the community came out in support of their own plan, they called it the Community Unity Map. This task force, including your appointees, really rejected it without seriously considering it. They mentioned it in discussion. They didn't bring it up on the screen. They didn't look at the districts. 80 organizations representing thousands of residents came together to create the Community Unity Map, and yet the task force, with a wave of a hand, dismissed it without. And if they're going to dismiss it because for cause, that's fine. But they didn't dismiss it for cause. Their excuse was that they didn't invent it themselves, but rather they just used the suggestions of their Q2 consultants, which offered them this gerrymandered map. And when people spoke against it, the majority spoke against it, they ignored them. And your appointees ignored the majority who spoke against it. So those are the facts I'd like you to consider when you consider whether to retain or not your commissioners. Thank you very much.
Okay. Next caller, all I see is a phone number. You are being unmuted. You have 2 minutes to comment.
Hi, my name is George Wooding. Please don't recall the three redistricting task force members. In the future, there needs to be a means test for redistricting applicants. As it was often said today, that the current appointees were quick learners. Redistricting members were initially supplied with great publicly developed citywide redistricting maps from the Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods, 41 neighborhood groups, and the citywide community unity maps, which at least had input from over 70. If either of these maps were adopted, 90+% of the Commission's map work would have been done without the problems you now face. What is the task force thinking? It would be a disaster if you recalled the task force, as this would be a symbol that SF is rotten to the core on a local and national level. SF currently ranks 149th out of the 150 worst metropolitan places to live in the United States. If you vote to recall, welcome to number 150. Thank you.
Okay, I will unmute the next caller. It's 415601 number. Caller, you're unmuted. You have 2 minutes to comment.
Okay. Dear Elections Commission, thank you for convening this meeting. My name is Tiffany Ng, and my family lives in San Francisco since 1979 on the border of D8 and D11, which gets redistricted back and forth. Back in 2020, I took part in census outreach, making sure that there's a fair and full count, and I'm participating in redistricting. I know the task force has a tremendous responsibility to listen to public input and inform map changes, be neutral and nonpartisan. And yet task force members, Election Commission appointees, Vice Chair Ditka Reiner, and member Kaisel Lee are not representing this role fully. We urge Elections Commission to provide oversight, ensure that appointees are accountable, transparent in this process. Please urge the Redistrict Task Force be more systematic in documenting public input and tracking map preferences publicly. Vice Chair Ditka Reiner is in position of leadership, and yet this task force has no consistent system tracking. And that's why they're voting in ways that are ignoring overwhelming public input. And I already expressed it, a lot of people expressed it earlier, that despite hundreds of public comments to support draft maps that kept Tenderloin and Soma together, and in D6, Vice Chair Reiner and members Kaisel Lee supported maps that split these communities. Especially, there were 3 out of 8 recognized cultural districts in San Francisco that said they want to stay together in D6, and they voted to split them up. So that's very appalling to me, and I'm hoping that the Elections Commission will take this seriously and hold your appointees accountable. Thank you. Yield my time.
Okay, I'm going to unmute the next caller. It's a 794 number. Caller, you have 2 minutes to comment.
Hi, my name is Paulina Thayer. The Elections Commission has been put in a partisan position by Dean Preston and his allies. You've also been put in the position to violate the Brown Act by holding this meeting. The letter writers have been grasping at straws to point out non-existent violations of process by the redistricting task force. The 3 a.m. vote isn't a violation of process. The meetings are public, people had the opportunity to stay on, public comment occurred before and after. The alleged illegality of Map 4B has been brought up by at least a couple of the letter writers. When asked what's illegal, the commenters weren't able to answer reasonably or at all. Of course, 4D advocates don't seem to appreciate that their preferred map isn't legal and that the task force tried late into the night to make that map work. A language interpretation complaint has been brought up. Anyone who has participated in public hearings knows that interpreters are generally available for a limited amount of time. This isn't specific to the redistricting task force. There has been a call to, quote, listen especially to the marginalized communities, translation, especially to Dean Preston or the Dean Prestons of the process. The main wrong-headed assumption is that marginalized communities are solely and best supported by the DSA. Another big backwards assumption is that the mapping process is to bend over backwards and every which way to favor the far left, legality be damned. So let's be real, the extreme left is foaming at the mouth because population shifts and contiguous neighborhoods are being properly acknowledged, and they're trying to arm twist to gerrymander. I think the Election Commission owes the task force and the reasonable public an apology for holding this meeting, and you should strongly consider issuing a statement in support of democracy. Thank you.
Okay, I am unmuting the next caller. It's a 602 prefix. Caller, you have 2 minutes to comment.
Yes, good evening. I'm Daphne Alden. I'm a San Francisco resident. I'm calling to show my strong support for the 3 members of the redistricting task force called under to question this afternoon. I can tell you that these dedicated public servants have been working tirelessly for months to hear from everyday San Franciscans. This meeting should have never happened for many reasons. For one, the agenda for today's special meeting provided only a vague description of its proposed discussion, which violates the Brown Act, and public commenting information on the original agenda was wrong, maybe because this meeting was so rushed. Also, I've lost a tremendous amount of respect for the ACLU and the League of Women Voters today, which is super sad. Neither group could come up with a coherent argument about why this meeting is even necessary. To pressure the Election Commission, which is supposed to be nonpartisan, to recall their appointees just because a group of people are unhappy with the task force members who are doing their actual job is in direct violation of the Federal Voting Rights Act. Furthermore, I have been attending task force meetings for months. I was listening live to the infamous meeting at 1:30 a.m. I'm continually impressed with the members' integrity and ability to have thoughtful conversations, and they absolutely are explaining their decisions as they make them. You spend months selecting these qualified candidates with integrity, ethics, and intellect through a grueling application and an interview process out of a pool of nearly 3,000 applicants. You need to stand by them and democracy right now. Thank you.
Okay. Next caller, Nicholas Doyle. You have 2 minutes to comment.
Hi, thank you. My name is Nicholas Doyle, and I live in the Mission District, and this is my first time speaking at a public meeting, so bear with me. I speak on the importance of keeping the redistricting task force independent. Firing 3 members of an independent commission would, by definition, make it a dependent commission. Those who have a problem with the proposed maps are using process as a facade to push partisan view of these maps. One can always disagree with a process, but the time for changing a process is before selecting a task force, not at the 11th hour. If you look around the country at redistricting maps from the 2020 census, the states and the cities that have the most fair maps are the ones that do not have independent commissions, which do not have interference from committees or legislative bodies. To remove 3 independent members now would make SF no better than, for example, the Michigan Republican-led state legislature, which overrid their independent commission earlier this year. Last year, Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor questioned how the Supreme Court could go forward with the stench of partisanship due to recent decisions. I submit that if this commission removes these members, this election commission would be forever stained for years with the stench of partisanship as well. Thank you for your time.
Next caller is 846 prefix. You are unmuted. You have 2 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Hi, commenter. You have 2 minutes.
I don't think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry.
It sounds like you have some other device turned on. Okay, it stopped. It was echoing.
Sorry. I'm glad that you held this hearing today. The hearing was called because
Caller, we can't hear you very well. Can you get closer to your microphone, please?
I am so close.
She needs to turn down her speaker.
Caller, are you still there? We have a suggestion that you turn down your speaker. Martha, let's move on to the next one and then we'll come back to her.
Okay, I'm also going to ask again, if you've already made a comment, please lower your hand because I see a long list and I see all the hands up still. And it's kind of hard for me to keep track when the hands aren't being lowered. Okay, 794 number, you have 2 minutes to comment. Hello? Okay, we're gonna move on. Jean Barish, you have 2 minutes to comment, please.
Good evening. I'm Jean Barish, Richmond District D1 resident. Thank you for calling this hearing today. I'm here to express my concern that the hundreds of public comments which your appointees on the Redistricting Commission were obligated to consider fell on deaf ears. Appointees to the commission must be neutral and nonpartisan, but yours consistently voted in ways that violated that pledge. I urge you to review the conduct of your appointees and assure public input is given the weight it deserves. I've sat through countless meetings stretching into the early hours of the morning. Never have I seen appointees sworn to represent the city's voters strain to rationalize decisions. At times I felt as though I was experiencing an Orwellian fever dream. No matter how often your appointees heard residents of D1 and throughout the city state that the redistricting cannot disenfranchise the underserved, vulnerable communities and Black and Brown residents, these comments were ignored. Instead, the districts were carefully redrawn to give disproportionate representation to the wealthy and take it from everyone else. The flip-flopping of your appointees raises serious questions about why they abruptly changed their minds. These questions will undermine the confidence of voters in the years to come and will cast a shadow of doubt over the validity of every election that will be held in the next 10 years. Voting rights are the bedrock of our democracy. Anything that taints these voting rights is unacceptable. Today is your chance to take action that will restore our confidence that each of our votes counts. Please take this corrective action. Thank you.
Next caller, Derek Lee, you have 2 minutes to comment.
Hi. Hello, Derek Lee, lifelong North Beach resident. I urge you against removing the 3 task force members. Well, I think it's terrible that we have to have this meeting in the first place, and it's a distraction, for an already really complicated process. I do want to thank the commission for your excellent questions, in particular to the 3 organizations that submitted letters. The reason I say that is because what I saw was that none of those organizations could really give a straight answer on what could have been different in terms of the process. That had anything to do with the 3 task force members specifically. The Asian Law Caucus brought up lack of language access and the compressed timelines, issues that have nothing to do with the 3 members. In addition, the speaker from the League of Women Voters mentioned concerns about legal issues and could not identify them. This meeting has revealed that there isn't really an argument that the members have done anything illegal or that there was anything wrong with the process. The critics of the members must only disagree with certain outcomes. It would be inappropriate to remove these 3 members this late in the process, resulting in an even-numbered commission. Even if you could replace them, such replacements would not have sat through the hours of commentary and done zero to outreach the existing members have done. Thank you.
Okay, next caller, 314 prefix, you have 2 minutes to comment.
Good evening, honorable commissioners. My name is Simon Timoney. I'm a 3rd-generation San Franciscan community organizer with Advocates 11 and a dyed-in-the-wool progressive activist. I say that last part because I volunteered on some of the campaigns for the people who support removing members of the redistricting task force, and my God, I am nothing but embarrassed at this attempt. I'm disgusted at certain elected officials who are trying to undermine our redistricting process. It's undemocratic, it's Trump-esque. My organization has been thoroughly involved in the redistricting process from the beginning. If there were anything suspicious or illegal going on, we would call for removals immediately. but no such activity exists. This is all being purported for political purposes only. Certain organizations are losing their minds over lines moving, but here's the thing, District 6 is at 30% over deviation. When you block housing in your district, some balancing has to happen. And a 3 a.m. vote, do you know how many 3 a.m. votes there have been in the history of San Francisco task forces? Like, votes happen after public comments, how it works. Get over yourself. A task force can't bend over backwards for your bedtime. And here's the thing about map 4D as in Delta. We endorsed that map for a short time until it showed that that map had areas 15 to 20% overpopulation. That map was actually illegal. And if that map were being brought forth by the redistricting task force, then yes, perhaps members should be removed. So we changed endorsements to map 4B as in Bravo. Everything we've seen is in earnest, transparent, and legal effort by the RDTF. Please retain these members. Retain democracy. We support them. Keep it going. Thank you so much. Simon Timoney, out.
Okay, next caller, the 264 prefix. You now have 2 minutes to comment.
Hi, my name is Edward Wright. I'm the president of the Harvey Milk LGBTQ Democratic Club. Our club was founded 46 years ago for the purpose of queer political self-determination by Harvey Milk, who was only able to become the first openly queer elected official in California because of district elections. These lines matter, this process matters, and this hearing matters. Thank you for holding it. Last week, we joined the Transgender District, the Leathern LGBTQ Cultural District, the GLBTQ Asian Pacific Alliance, Equality California, and the Alice B. Toklas LGBTQ Democratic Club to condemn the task force's efforts to divide queer and trans communities and dilute our voting power as a minority. Those groups are not all political, and those of us that are have wildly different politics. Our call was not partisan. It was to protect our voting rights as a minority. There's only one LGBTQ county legislator in the entire Bay Area. San Francisco has never elected a trans person in city office, and queer and trans people face legal assault across the country. Our public input was never even acknowledged by the task force until last night after this meeting was called, and our communities remain divided and our votes diluted in the current draft maps against the clear majority of public input. I don't think these members are bad people. I do think this has been a bad process. They started mapping too late, and we don't know how they use public input because there's no system in place for how they count it, weigh it, or prioritize it. They have not set clear priorities to decide trade-offs, and the trade-offs they make seem to consistently favor whiter, wealthier, and less queer communities. And just as a matter of public record, Vice Chair Reiner did say the remark in question discounting vulnerable communities, and despite her testimony, she's donated to local candidate campaigns while acting as the Vice Chair of the Commission. Those are public records, and frankly, I'm disturbed that she was less than honest with you today. Bad processes lead to bad outcomes, or in this case, potentially unfair elections. If you're concerned about people questioning the independence of this process, we already are. I can't tell you what to do, but I just want to thank you again for your time and your oversight.
Next caller, 650-492. You have 2 minutes to comment.
Hello, Elections Commission. My name is Jonathan Mead, and I've lived in San Francisco since 1979. I want to talk to you about how listening is one thing and being responsive is another. I will give you but one example, and that is the disregard of the voices who live in the Tenderloin and Central Soma. On 321 or 323, the task force released maps 3A and 3B. We had 3 or 4 days to digest these maps and respond we did, especially to map 3B, because 3B was not a good map. Not for the Tenderloin, not for D6, not for Central Soma, and not for the city. On 325, the task force heard from over 70 people, and the vast majority of commenters, many of them from the TL and Central Soma, were passionately and cogently explaining how map 3B would be a disaster for their communities and was the wrong way to go. But then the task force, unbelievably or maybe not, voted 5-4 to go to map 3B. This was the day we began to feel like our voices didn't matter. At the next meeting on 326, some task force members requested a map that put the Tenderloin back into D6. This was map 4D. On 4.2, the task force met again, and the response was overwhelming, with 117 commenters practically begging the task force to reverse course and go with map 4D. And for a brief moment, we felt like we were being heard because the task force voted 8-1 to move forward with map 4D. But that feeling was short-lived. On 4-4, the task force worked until 2:30 in the morning, somehow managed to make zero progress, threw up their hands, threw map 4D into the trash, and voted to go in a different direction again. When hundreds of low and middle income residents and our most vulnerable communities are asking the task force not to tear our communities apart, and a smaller number of wealthy residents are saying the process is going great, that right there should tell you something is wrong. Thank you.
Okay, next caller is a 415-305 number. You are unmuted and you have 2 minutes to comment.
Thank you, Commissioners and President Bernholtz, for holding this hearing. There is nothing to fear from sunshine and transparency. It is regrettable that the redistricting process has become so toxic. So many of us, members of the public, have, like the task force, lost sleep, spent many exhausting hours engaged in this process. Those of us who are disturbed and who have spoken up about glaring inequities in the late night votes and the disconnect between a majority of public commenters not being heard, as reflected in these votes, are not paid professionals. I am a landscaper and a 40-year resident of San Francisco. I'm not a paid shill. I volunteer in my local community and I care deeply about my neighbors. We always knew this process would be difficult and challenging. We understood that all residents, would have to make concessions and compromises. My concerns, the rushed process and now impossible deadline of April 14th midnight seems moot because of the task force's wasting of time on U-turn votes. And nowhere in the city charter does it state what exactly will happen if the deadline is missed. So that's kind of a false, that's a false thing to be looked at. Also, Chairman Townsend and the 3 Department of Election task force members, when questioned about keeping a tally of public comments, were not responsive. It's not a difficult task. Controls should be in place to keep track of public comment. I also think that Reverend Townsend should get an Oscar for his performance tonight. Thank you.
Okay, 408-230, you are unmuted and you have 2 minutes to comment.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Adam in D6. I've lived in San Francisco in D6 since just after the turn of the century. One of the commissioners asked earlier about the root cause of the mapping disagreements. The root cause is the sheer size of D6, and that's had the direct result of disenfranchising most of us in D6 over the past decade, with our votes being worth 40% less than those on the west side of the city. This has also meant that communities in D6 have had to focus on helping each other because we don't get as much attention from the city hall. Those of us south of I-80, South Soma, Mission Bay, etc., are ignored by the communities north of 80. Both groups feel strongly about staying together, which is only possible if the task force splits us into separate districts. We're happy to do that, but we've heard from many commenters in other districts, such as D5, that they don't want that to happen. That leaves the option of either destroying our community of interest or splitting the Tenderloin and Central Soma community of interest. Population challenges like this cause effects in other districts, again, especially those in the center of the city like D5, which we know is gerrymandered in the past. A reminder, a district is not a COI. D5 residents can't speak for D6. The change that we've been seeing is the voices in D6 have started speaking up for ourselves because we don't want to be split apart. We have our own communities. There are 2 large communities in D6. Trying to keep those together is causing this tension. The task force has done the best they can with really a very untenable situation. I certainly do not like all the decisions they made, but moving to 4B was not done in bad faith. It was done after community feedback. I think you have a choice. You can either support the independent process, or you can go ahead and support the question.
The 2 minutes. Next caller, Danielle Deibler, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it. You have 2 minutes to comment.
I will say that's amazing. You actually pronounced my name correctly.
Oh.
So thank you. So I want to thank the redistricting task force and the election commission for their commitment to public service and also fair representation in elections. I have a couple of small comments. So a couple of callers have said that we had 3,000 applicants for the redistricting task force. That's actually not correct. It was 35. So I just want to give people some perspective. I agree on the characterization of qualitative versus quantitative that a few other callers have talked about. So you need both of them to be able to do this process. So the quantitative helps you understand kind of the input of the community at a very unbiased perspective. The qualitative, it helps you understand the narrative of the community, right? What's the community of interest that people are trying to talk about? And I also want to make a shout out to John Carroll. I have actually been in every redistricting task force meeting, either in the meeting or listening to the meetings afterwards, and he has done an incredible job dealing with a very, very hard problem. There are a few other things I'd like to call out. So I think the redistricting task force members, they received inadequate training. In the late part of March, they were asking a lot about the VRA requirements and asking for the city clerk to give them a memo on that. That took a little bit of time to get back to them. It meant that they did not have the education, I think, that they needed to be able to understand how they were going to actually produce these maps. The community training for the mapping tool was not adequate. You need to be someone who understands how to use mapping tools to be able to use this tool. It doesn't work on mobile. It doesn't work on tablets. It's not adequate for the public to give input. So something better on terms of paper maps. The community outreach, not adequate as well. The language access for each of the meetings, early times, we had many times where it was obvious that a particular district had a language preference or some type of language that was required in that particular district, and maybe somebody didn't ask for it, but it wasn't provided. And I saw it many times in D1
Caller,
with
you have
Russian
hit your 2
translator.
minutes.
Oh,
I'm
thank you.
sorry. Thank you. Next is an 826 prefix. You have 2 minutes to comment.
Hello, this is Anastasia Yovanopoulos. I'm a tenant in District 8. I thank you for calling this meeting to call the task force members to task. They were listening, but they weren't hearing what we were saying. And so that's why they were called to task. It seems like they were tone deaf. They're catching on a little bit now, but it's too late. They don't have their heart in the process. I don't know how it's going to turn out, but it's still a mess. And anything you can do to help with this process I'd be grateful for. Thank you.
Okay, next caller, 415-260. You are unmuted and you have 2 minutes to comment.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, my name is Dr. Teresa Palmer. I'm a retired doc in D5. I am not a robotic member of Dean Preston's Minions. I just live here and I care about my community. And even more, I worry about D6. And there seems to be an extremely flawed, even if it isn't technically illegal, there's something terribly wrong with the process where the task force took forever to listen and then put out maps that destroyed communities, especially underserved communities. I live north of Panhandle. I've always considered myself to be living in the Western Addition for this to be part of the Haight-Ashbury. My immediate area is divided within blocks into 5 different districts. It's nuts. And there's no justification for it. And this was done so D6 could be broken up. It doesn't make any sense. There's something wrong. They may have been the task force may have been physically present at some of these meetings, but they did not listen. And it reeks to me of undue influence. there's something going on. It needs to be fixed. What I ask you to do at this late stage is keep the task force on as short a rope as you can do it. Each member needs to represent all the people of San Francisco and not their people. That is the nature and the mission of their task. Please do your best to help the people of
Caller,
D6
you have hit the
and
2
D10.
minute, you have hit the 2 minute limit. I'm sorry. Next caller, 305-586. You have 2 minutes to comment.
Hi, my name is Jessica Pola. I want to say that I think the task force are doing like an incredible job, given that they have to listen to so many people and try to consider as many things as possible. But they're trying to fix something that was created 10 years before them, 20 years before them, and I don't envy the task that they have to like undo what's been done and try to make it better for the next 10 years, for the next 20 years. And that's what I wanted to say. I don't think they should be taken off the task at all. Thank you very much.
Okay, next caller, Dana Bushell. You have 2 minutes to comment.
Hi, my name is Dana, and I live in D6, and I'm calling in support of all 3 task force members. This hearing represents San Francisco politics at its absolute worst. Instead of acknowledging that decades of policies have locked us into an array of tough choices, we just impugn the character of those charged with actually making those decisions. Pretend that if they were not there, everything would continue to be magic happy unicorns. We need to stop doing that. It's a really bad habit, and it's really bad for democracy. The fact is, the city's population has grown over the past decade, but not in a geographically equitable way. So that means that districts have to change a lot. There's never going to be a perfect map because human relationships are complex and overlapping. At the end of the day, we're just going to have to accept that district lines are somewhat arbitrary at the end. I know this. I live on a border of 2 districts myself. It's fine. You'll live. Thank you.
Okay, next caller, Selena, you have 2 minutes to comment.
Hello, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Selena. I wanted to call in to support the 3 members of the task force. I've been to several of the meetings, and I see how they work, and I wanted to say they've been doing an amazing job listening to everyone. And each meeting there was so many people calling in, and they were patiently listening and then looking at the map. And I myself is also, I'm not a native English speaker. I do speak I speak Cantonese and Mandarin. So each times doing these meetings, there were non-English speakers that were calling in, and they were being listened, and informations were taken down and listened to. So I'm not quite sure, when it comes to not listening, where is that coming from? Especially, I was there earlier and I have to leave the meeting, the in-person meeting. There were so many seniors there, and I was speaking to them, and they wanted to let you know that they've been heard, and they are in strong support of the 3 members. They wanted to let you know, let them do their job, because they should not, they should be independent. They should not be pushed just because someone is not happy. We should provide the feedback, but we should not remove someone in the process of and restart the whole thing over again. That's a waste of time. That's a waste of money. So we should provide feedback, but we should not remove the members from this task force. Let them do their job, and this is why they have meetings, in-person meeting in different districts.
Okay, caller, you've reached your 2 minute max.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Next caller is 505-570. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, I'm Keith Mosier. I'm currently a representative of D6, which means I'm underrepresented. I'm a future resident of, who knows, apparently I'm the little notch that gets moved every single draft. But I don't actually care about that because I trust these commissioners. And in your comment, Mr. Brockman, he alluded to what precedent does it set if you were to give in to this overt meddling campaign and move these commissioners. You know, would future commissioners be more open to persuasion? But I have a simpler question. Who would want to do this job? Already there's so much damage done to, like, this is a thankless job. These are volunteers who have been working late in the hours of the night, every night, trying to do what is frankly impossible. And I'm so happy we found 3 people who are so dedicated and caring to getting this very important thing somewhat right. If you try to point me, I would say no, because I like to clock off before 10 p.m. I listened to other comments, and what I heard was that they have been given almost no resources in the middle of the pandemic, no procedure, no process, had to learn everything from scratch, and they think they've done an amazing job. And I'm just mad that they have to put up with it, that they have to have their names dragged in the newspaper for all the time they sacrificed trying to help the city to get a fair and balanced map as best it can. I'm very upset that we have to be here. I am upset that you gave into the pressure to hold this meeting. And I really hope that you put the foot down now and don't let this go any further and let them do the job that they have volunteered their time so gracefully to do for our city. Thank you, commissioners.
Next caller, you are unmuted and you have 2 minutes to comment.
Thank you. My name is Stephanie, and as an elected delegate to the California Democratic Party and a San Francisco resident who has been watching and participating in the month-long process of redistricting, I am shocked and dismayed that this commission would take the unprecedented step of scheduling a meeting to discuss the possible removal of 3 members of the task force that the commission itself appointed after a lengthy, open, and transparent selection process. Make no mistake, what you are doing in even scheduling this meeting is a blatant corruption of an otherwise fair and non-political process, and the fallout will reverberate throughout the entire political community. The last few months have been full of the impressive, committed, professional, compassionate, and intellectual efforts of these task force members who brought the highest integrity to the challenge and enormity of the job. They endured hours-long sessions of public comment, as well as verbal and written harassment, yet they showed up and brought an impartial, non-political ethic to their task. Your actions leave the public and me with no choice but to conclude that this decision to consider removal of 3 of them is purely political, a move at the behest of Supervisors Peskin, Preston, and Chan that not only undermines our democracy and violates our voting rights, but also taints the integrity of the commission, the redistricting process, and the already sullied reputations of those supervisors. Should you remove any one of these members at this late stage after all the solid and impartial work they have done, it will correctly be perceived by the public as a threat to our right to representative government, and you will have knowingly caused damage to the fabric and foundation of political life in this city for years to come. I urge you to take a page from your own task force members and do not kowtow to the corrosive political influence of Supervisors Chan, Peskin, and Preston. I implore you to engage in the level of integrity, honesty, and responsibility your commission is bound to uphold, and that the task force has valiantly displayed to this point. Thank you.
Leilani, you have 2 minutes to comment. You're unmuted.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that thank you for holding this meeting. I know a lot of people didn't want it, but it's good for transparency. That is what democracy is. The issue is that some commissioners make comments that sometimes seemed biased, that sometimes seemed that they were protecting their own districts. One commissioner complained about, if I keep hearing about redlining, I mean, this is why the hearing was called for today. I was one of the speakers who brought up that after 7 o'clock, there was no translation. And many people kept calling from 7 till 3 a.m. and they didn't have a translator. And then after that, the commissioner would start drawing maps. How could you draw maps if you didn't even know what they said? So I was sort of confused, like, where's the organization? They weren't showing maps that other people had drawn. They were stating that they just couldn't make D6 whole, which I've seen other maps that have. To me, it felt like the VP was trying to really protect Russian Hill, and it just came across. And so, this hearing is being held today because I think people need to go back, watch and listen to the video and hear that a lot of personal political statements were made by the commissioners. And instead of just focusing on mapping, they started talking about supervisors being upset and their constituents being upset. Just focus on the maps. Just get to it the best way you can. And they made it political. The commissioners, VP commissioner, she made it political. And so did others on the panel. And I know it's very tense right now, but as residents, we have a right to call in and say how we feel about our district. And it's up for them to have tough skin and keep on making the maps work. And they
Okay,
verbally.
Leilani, I'm sorry, you've hit your 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Zay Lat, you are next. You have 2 minutes to comment.
Oh, thank you so much. Hi, commissioners. My name is Zay David Lat. I am calling in today to express my strong support for the 3 dedicated public servant appointed by this very own commission to the redistricting task force. I'm supporting and standing with Queso Lee, Dicta Rayner, Raynell Cooper. These commissioners have listened to people so much up until 3 a.m. in the morning, which is now being called into question and accused of for not listening to the public. I will also like to remind the commissioners for the lack of proper notice that note specific actions being taken to the public to give the public a chance to give proper input. I think it's mostly because it is being rushed. The 3 organizations, which I admire tremendously today, registered their complaint, but did not make recommendation to remove the members. Actually, they were asked repeatedly to whether they have a position, and they did not.
Okay. I did not mute that call. I don't know how that happened. Next caller, 650-766. You have 2 minutes to comment.
Hello, commissioners. My name is Jonathan Bühnemann. I'm a resident of District 2, and I'm calling in because I'm very angry that we even have this meeting tonight. I think just by having the meeting, we have already did so much damage to volunteer efforts in San Francisco to participate in our political process. I'm a recent resident, and I'm starting to become engaged, even though I'm not even a citizen yet, but becoming engaged in the neighborhood because I'm learning that I love this city and I care so much about it. I think by efforts like this one, by even having a meeting to discuss the potential to remove people at the 11th hour, we are showing that this is about power play, that this is about partisan politics, and we're setting a terrible example, and I'm really disappointed by this. This is a complete waste of time, and that's a bad example in San Francisco. Please refrain from any such efforts in the future. Thank you.
Nathan Smith, you are unmuted and you have 2 minutes to comment.
Thank you, Commission. I want to be clear. The ACLU and the League of Women Voters are engaged in an overtly politically partisan attack on the task force, and the existence of this meeting is an extension of that attack and a direct threat to the task force members who have worked for 8 months to resist gerrymandering. They want you to put your finger on the scales of a specific map, and many of the commenters today have said exactly that. The task force must consider every need expressed at every meeting over the last 8 months, whether it is in person, via phone, or by email. They must also consider all of the individuals who never make comment. Just because you can't make public comment doesn't mean you don't count. The idea that a relatively small number of politically partisan actors who have the luxury of coming in person should be prioritized in a city of over 880,000 is an absolute travesty. As the chair pointed out, the concern over the 3M activity and the threat of illegality, quote unquote illegality, were outright lies. There's been a lot of talk about process today. Making false accusation is, in fact, a corruption on that process. And indulging those politically partisan false accusations is an extension of that corruption. Scheduling a surprise meeting on top of a previously scheduled redistricting task force meeting and preventing 4 task members from from conducting their business is a further corruption of that process. I urge you to end this now. Put an end to putting additional restrictions on the task force is an unprecedented attack on, quote, the process that everyone here claims to care about so much. Members Lee, Cooper, and Reiner have served honorably in the face of threats, harassment, and stalking. The only meeting you should hold is to commend them. Thank you.
Okay. William Walker, you have 2 minutes to comment.
Hi, commissioners and staff. I'm former secretary of this body. My name is William Walker. I live in D11. Hope you're all doing well. I made a map today, and after the tool crashed about 7 times, I was able to get D6 with Tenderloin, Soma, and the Leather District all in one. It didn't have Treasure Island. I was also able to get the Western Edition in District 5. I was able to do a District 10 that respects the wishes of the African American community, as well as a District 11. It's on Twitter. Will Plan Cal is my Twitter. I've also emailed it to you all, to your commission address. I remember that. What I will say is I don't think you should remove these members, but they've been saying for the past 3 meetings that I've been at, and I've been there till 3 a.m. too, and I don't have the pleasure of being a member of the task force. They say that it's impossible to make this map with those districts whole. Well, I've done it. And I don't have consultants drawing the maps for me. And I also was told by the vice chair that like I shouldn't bring my anger. And I don't think I've been angry, but I am upset that a chair of a body would tell someone, a vice chair would tell someone how they should appear. It's really important as public servants that we listen to folks and try to let them say what they need. And 180 people asked for D6 to be whole and for D5 and D10 and D11. And if those districts split, they'll dilute the vote of the African American community. So I hope you consider that. And I appreciate you for calling the meeting. I don't think the members should be removed, but I think you should be aware of their what they're doing and be aware of the process and make sure that the will of the people is heard. Thank you. And good to talk to you.
Okay, next caller, 650-222. You have 2 minutes to comment.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Yan. I'm a resident in District 2. I'm here to show my solidarity and support to the redistricting task force. These dedicated public servants have been working tirelessly for months to hear from everyday San Franciscans. I have myself called in many times, and I'm actually quite upset that we have to call in, be in front of the Election Commission about the possibility of removal. This is completely partisan political play, and the agenda of today's meeting provides only a vague description of its proposed discussion and action, which violates the Brown Act in the same way that a court found the Board of Education over the discussion did last year. To pressure the Elections Commission, which is supposed to be nonpartisan, to recall their appointees just because a group of people are unhappy with the task force members doing their job is in direct violation of the Federal Voting Rights Act. I've been watching the redistricting task force for months. I'm continuously impressed with their integrity and ability to have thoughtful conversations. Your job as the Election Commission is to be nonpartisan and not bend to political tactics. I've been listening to the calls this evening, and many people have expressed the concern this meeting should not take place from the first place. I'm an immigrant myself, and I take pride in my American citizenship and my voting rights very, very carefully. And I strongly urge the Election Commission not to consider removing the task force members. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Phone number 412-708. You have 2 minutes to comment.
Hi, you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Well, hey, Commissioner. I just want to say that, just because we have a bunch of angry, whining political insiders, they're just annoyed that they might not be getting exactly what they want in the redistricting. And so, they want to derail many months of work by the task force. I'm not sure why we're elevating their illegitimate complaints by even holding this meeting. But because this meeting is there, I do want to call in and say, well, I'm disappointed and disgusted at some of the elected supervisors involving themselves in the redistricting process. I believe that is highly inappropriate, and I wish that they'd stop. And I also want to express my support for the members of the task force who've worked really hard for many months, and especially so over the last couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, 847 phone number. You have 2 minutes to comment.
Hello, Commissioners. Thank you for taking your time tonight. My name is Theo Gordon, and I'm a longtime resident of San Francisco. I'd like to encourage you to affirm the independence of the task force and let them finish their job. Reject these partisan calls to remove them from their roles and let them make the maps as they have sworn to do. If you look at the opposition to the task force, we have folks like Dean Preston, who's scared about losing the wealthy homeowners that are his support base from his district. Sandra Lee Fewer wants to pick voters for her handpicked successor. And Hillary Ronen on Twitter today in a fight that was not becoming of a public servant with Matt Haney said that she was disgusted to Matt Haney. You used to stand with us before you decided to abandon your district. Thought that wasn't a betrayal because Honey Mahogany was going to win. So the TLDR on that is that Hillary Ronen is upset because she thinks the new lines or the possible lines are not doing enough to benefit her chosen candidate for the next District 6 election. These are all political considerations from political operatives. They are exactly the things that the task force is not allowed to consider. It is the things that the task force are not considering. And they were sworn not to do that, and they are doing their job as they're supposed to. Please dismiss these concerns and let them finish that job. Finally, in an even more egregious display of the utter hackery of this complaint, the League of Pissed Off Voters this morning boosted an accusation by Scott Feeney that amounted to, hey, I was at a party 4 years ago. I don't really remember what happened, but I heard someone say something about redistricting, and maybe Kesa Lee was there, but probably wasn't, but I think he's friends with somebody who might have been at that party. Give me a break. This is partisan hackery at its worst. San Francisco, it's a bunch of San Francisco political operatives trying to undermine our commitment to democracy. Please ignore please ignore the pressure.
We have hit the 2 minute limit.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see anyone's hands raised. I see a lot of hands that were not put down. So I'm going to clear all the hands. If I miss someone, please *3 again. Okay, so you can be included. Dwight Crow, you have 2 minutes to comment.
All right. Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Phenomenal. Dwight Crow here, Soma resident. My father, grandmother, and great-grandmother all called San Francisco home. I am actually calling in from Nepal, so I'm really glad you can hear me. And I've been on the line for 6 hours because I did not know how to time this correctly. In short, I'm calling in solidarity of the redistricting task force. These task members were selected for their capability, their partisanship, and their love of San Francisco. When I heard about the desire to pull them from the task force, I was horrified. This strikes me as nothing but some groups in SF trying to subvert our independent process in their favor. If there were complaints about our task force members or the process, it should have emerged earlier. And I think some of the suggestions for greater transparency are worthwhile. However, the fact that this only emerged after the maps were shown shows to me that it is not about the process, but about the outcome. I'm profoundly grateful for this independent commission. Please do not set the horrific precedent of breaking the integrity and independence of our fair elections in SF. Thank you.
Thank you. Todd Berman, you have 2 minutes to comment.
Thank you. And thank you for putting in the work today and doing this. I've been following the redistricting process. And something to note, I think, is that since the last redistricting process, the San Francisco has created cultural districts, which if these official cultural districts are not communities of interest that should be have the top priority. I don't know what would be. I think that's where the lines in the sand should be. But then when we see the task force hear an overwhelming public comment to keep these cultural districts intact when districts are drawn, seeing those comments be ignored in favor of keeping together other areas, I see that, and I just think the only conclusion I can see is that some members have a desired result, a map in mind, and they're reverse engineering arguments and a process to get to those maps, which happen to favor wealthier voters and wealthier areas. And Commissioner Reiner told you today that she is considering all input, but the task force has refused to consider the community unity map that came from a genuine collaborative process. I heard you ask Commissioner Cooper if he was contacted by elected officials between the big D4 U-turn vote. And I did not hear you ask that of Commissioners Reiner and Chesa Lee. So I think that's something to consider. So really ask them, have they talked to public officials? Get them on record. Let's find out, do they have an end goal in mind? And also, I think you should stand up
Caller,
for
you have
cultural
reached your
districts.
2-minute limit.
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry. Thank you. And the last caller, you are unmuted. Oops, no, you're not. You're unmuted. You have 2 minutes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
It is David Pilpel. So could I get a 30-second warning before the end? Thank you. This is a tough issue, and there is not much time here to speak. I served as an appointee on the task force from the Elections Commission 10 years ago. There are still people who hate me for the work that I did then, and they always will. I have attended many of the meetings this year. I applied to serve on the task force again last year by this commission. I was not appointed. There is much that I could say on all this. Last June, I spoke in support of your 3 appointees, and the record properly reflects those comments. Much has been said and written about the task force and its work, especially in the last few days and hours. I am not happy about the current map, and I hope that all task force members work to improve it today and tomorrow. However, having weighed a possible bad map versus the considerable uncertainty from removing 1 or more members, I oppose removal right now. We all bear some responsibility here. The appointment vetting process needs to be upgraded for next time. The work plan, outreach, and timeline, all of those need review and changes in the future, no question. Clerk Calvillo spoke to some of that earlier. While some very heavy politics are at work here.
You have 30 seconds.
Thanks. I'll speed up. Appreciate it. I may not agree with all of your appointees, and my views are not intended to be popular. I conclude that it would be worse for the city to remove anyone at this point. I repeat my request that all task force members, including Chair Townsend, reconsider what makes sense for the city over the weekend. I respect different views on the issue here, but I ask each of you to decide what's best for the city overall. I think it is too late for better or different members, but it's not too late for a better map. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Next, we have 415-987. You have 2 minutes to comment.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Carol Ito. I have been voting for 70 years in San Francisco and D7, and I've been listening. I was at your hearing for 5 hours this afternoon, and now I'm home on the internet listening to the proceedings. And I strongly want to urge you to retain the 3 members of the task force. I have watched since September the deliberations that you went through in your vetting to appoint these 3 members, and I hope they haven't disappointed you. I know there's been some questions and some quotes from the League of Women Voters, and you commissioners had questioned some of Ms. Reiner's quotes, which I believe you need to ask for the tapes because I think it was taken out of context. And also the accusation against Chesa Lee about Portola district. I heard him last night that he was protecting that area and responding to some of the comments in the Portola area was retained in District 10, I believe. And I don't think you've been hearing from the other districts like my District 7, where the task force has done a lot of listening, have appropriately brought back the OMI into D11 as they wanted and taken them out of my D7. And also District 5, they've done a lot of back and forth trying to keep Japantown, a 115-year-old community in the Western Addition, in the same district, because they've been working together for probably over 80 years as smaller communities in this city. And I think that the 3 appointments that you had vetted very well have been very impressive. Linnell Cooper, as you know, walked every precinct before he was even appointed to understand what this task was going to involve. Tessa Lee is
Caller,
on
you
top of,
have hit the 2-minute.
okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Last caller, 315-560. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, commissioners. Thank you for staying this long. I really appreciate that you guys are holding this hearing today and are performing this oversight function. I know it's a touchy subject. I've been observing this process. I'm a resident of D5. I just wanted to say that I think you were asking the right question in today's meeting, which is what happened between the Saturday meeting, which was voted on 8-1, and Monday to justify such a radical change in the maps. And that was really what upset me and a lot of other people, I believe, is that such a radical change was made this late in the process. And one question, I listened to the public comments on both days, and they were substantially similar. And so that begs the question to me, like what happened outside of the public hearing to effectuate this change if it wasn't the public comments? And I think like the question I would really want to have asked of all of the task force members, not just yours, is if parties like the mayor weighed in specifically with them and communicated with them during this time period. And I also wanted to highlight specific integrity concerns that were made by another comment letter that you guys received today, which I hope you can find it, made by Scott Feeney, that specifically recalled his own eyewitness testimony of Chazelle Lee at the SFUMB election night party discussing gerrymandering and specifically discussing moving the Tenderloin out of D6 in order to improve their election chances in the future. And I think like this is kind of a new allegation, and it's a bit, it's a bit of a bombshell, and I really wish you guys would take that seriously. And I think for that reason, like that's another piece of something worth considering that does disqualify Chazelle in my mind. And I appreciate the work that the task force members have made.
2-minute limit.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was the last caller. Oh. Let me see if that's the same person. Hi, I'm sorry. Is this the person who commented already?
Oh, sorry. I didn't hang up. Sorry.
Yes, thank you. All right.
All right. Thank you to all of the commenters in person and on the phone. I think now it's time for the commission to talk. So I open it up to my fellow commissioners who would like to make first.
I have some preliminary thoughts, which is that, reflecting on that meeting on Wednesday, but I think that, without a lot of background information, we gave a lot of credence to concerns raised by public commenters. Some of them may be legitimate, I don't know. And then a lot of credence to letters issued by some of the speakers, and those letters are from institutions that I personally respect very much, like the League of Women Voters or Asian Law Caucus or ACLU San Francisco. And I think that I think that credence and, you know, the lack of background led this commission, I'm not sure it was the commission actually, because I don't think we took a vote on it, to improvidently set and, you know, and propose an agenda, I would say. I don't necessarily think it's wrong that we heard from the public and invited the redistricting task force members that we appointed to appear here and to address concerns. I do question whether it was the right move for this commission to suggest that we would take a remedy as drastic as removal without a fact finding or without understanding or contemplating or discussing what the standard should be. And, you know, I have so much sympathy for those three members of the task force. And that's what I feel the worst about here. And that's what I feel like we should all be embarrassed about, to be honest. I think this commission should be embarrassed that we put them in a position where we suggested that they had impliedly engaged in some kind of malfeasance, where even the authors of those letters, given the opportunity to state on the record whether there was an illegality, whether those members should be, any or all of them should be removed, whether even what the standards are that we should contemplate for discussing and thinking about whether they should be removed, that somehow that we can accomplish anything that drastic in one session, days away from when their maps are due, and taking them away from their work when we took months and months in this process, that was a grave, grave mistake. And it was, I don't think it's enough for us to just say, okay, well, we invited and we listened and that's good enough, because one, we've damaged these people. We've damaged them. And I feel very, very badly that I'm any part of this, where these volunteers who've stayed up so late and, you know, done their best, you know, are pilloried like this. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. And I personally don't think it's enough for us to just say, oh, well, no malfeasance found and walk away. I mean, there needs to be something more than that, in my personal opinion. In my personal opinion, I think at a minimum, we need to find what has been so apparent here, which is that there is no malfeasance. And we need to affirm the work and the independence of the task force, because to do otherwise would be to undermine what they're there for. And I think we need to applaud their hard work. We haven't been there. We can't say that some words were inartfully said. I don't know. But I do know that they're working hard, and that's apparent. So that would be my motion.
I think at the meeting and in the letters, there were serious allegations and we took them seriously. And I think we wanted an opportunity to understand what was going on, because we are not an oversight body for the task force. I can't speak for the rest of you. I had no clue what was going on, and I, in fact, didn't know of any of the issues with the task force until Tuesday. So I think there was a lot of value in us understanding what happened. I do think at the meeting on Wednesday, I don't believe any of our commissioners talked about removal. I know removal was brought up, and I don't think we redirected, and that was a mistake on our end, because certainly in my mind, removal was not on the table. I wholeheartedly agree with you that I see no reason after this meeting, especially, that we should be removing our 3 task force members. I think we did identify that there are some shortcomings of the process, but the remedy is not removing our three appointees, nor taking any other action other than potentially participating in, I think the task force is putting together recommendations for the next one, and perhaps we have comments on that. I think you're right. I similarly am, I think it was heartening to see how committed and dedicated these three individuals were to the process, which is what we saw in them when we appointed them and what we were hoping for. And anything that I think I potentially would disagree with them on if I were in their shoes would be decisions, and I'm not in their shoes and I haven't been through that process. So I don't feel comfortable saying that there's anything other than that they have done anything other than earn our kind of gratitude and respect. And I similarly would, I think there is value to what we did here today, but I don't necessarily think that having this meeting was necessary or the right course of action for the commission. President Bernholz.
Thank you, Vice President Chappell. I want to agree with both of your comments. I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding clearly expressed by many of the, I counted 50 some odd comments, and us, as to whether or not we are an oversight body for the task force. I have been unable to find that documented anywhere. And I think that is one of the first things that will need to be clarified. I have taken extensive notes on all of the public comment in person and online, as well as the letters and emails and whatnot. I have at least 8 recommendations that were very specifically put forward for the task force. I too feel like there is a statement necessary from this commission, both appreciating the work of the task force and calling for process improvements, both for the task force and also I think there needs to be some clarity. This may be a question to the city attorney's office over who is oversight for a task force. We are an appointing authority of one of 3, and frankly, I believe that was where our authority ended. So I think there's a lot of information that needs to be clarified both for ourselves and for the public. I'm not quite sure if Commissioner Jung was making a formal motion for a statement of support or a statement of a statement. I would make a motion that we would, let me just find it. I drafted it earlier. Sorry to hold you up. That we make a resolution that after hearing extensive public comment, that the Elections Commission finds that the work of the redistricting task force may be imperfect. It could certainly benefit from a series of recommendations, which we might either list out here or elsewhere. But there's been no information to suggest that either our appointees or the task force writ large have committed any misconduct that undermines the integrity of their work. We appreciate and thank them for their service, and we move on. Whether or not we should continue to, as has been suggested by members of the public, we should claim some oversight role for the task force. I don't see where that role is given to us. I think the public has, with many motivations, turned to this commission. We called this hearing for information, but I do not believe we are, I do not know where it is stated that we are the oversight body for the task force.
A question for DCA Flores. The agenda item for this meeting was somewhat intentionally oblique. Are we able to make a motion for a resolution like President Bernholz has just described? Or is that something that we should agendize for our next meeting, which we have not canceled, the general April meeting, or whichever one becomes the next meeting? What is more appropriate from a process point?
Thank you for the question, Vice President Chapo. I believe that your agenda item stated that your hearing was regarding your appointees to the redistricting task force. So any sort of resolution that you'd like to make in support of appointees will be within what the agenda states.
Great, helpful to know. I do want to let the other commissioners speak now before we kind of move forward with motions.
Yeah, so I echo some of the comments both of you have shared so far. I do disagree though on the point that we should feel embarrassed today. I think that given the circumstances, I think having the hearing today was valuable. On Wednesday, we heard so many public comments, like by far more public comments than we've ever heard at any commission meeting in my 8 years. And we really didn't have an opportunity at that meeting to really discuss them or determine the merits of any of the comments that were being made, because that was taking place during the agenda item for future meetings. So we were given this information, and due to the compressed timeline, there's very little we could do to kind of know whether we should have this meeting. So I think if we didn't have the meeting, it could have been viewed as negligent, because if these concerns were valid, then we just don't know. But also, I think by having this hearing, we also gave a chance for the 3 appointees to speak for themselves and to defend themselves and to speak about their work. And we also let the chair speak, and we let the people that are in support of them speak. So I feel like this was a healthy discussion. This is an activity that happens only once every 10 years. So I think it's okay to have one long meeting, for that event. But and I don't think we as a commission, we have pilloried any of the appointees for certain. But we did ask them questions to kind of probe some of the comments that were made on Wednesday night. And I think it was a healthy discussion, even though it takes a lot of time from all of you and the appointees and also ourselves. So, and again, I do want to thank everyone, all of you, for being here, and for everyone that's listening in at home for, taking the time to listen and to comment.
So I would like to agree with all of the comments my fellow commissioners have made. I really want to echo Commissioner Jordanik's point. This is democracy. We were asked by the public to have a hearing. We provided a forum for everyone to hear directly from our appointees. I agree with President Bernholz. I don't believe we're an oversight body. I don't think that makes sense, because the whole point of the redistricting task force is that they're an independent body. So, but we do have responsibility as an appointing authority to make sure that our appointees are living up to their mandates. And I think this hearing was an attempt to ascertain that. I think that we were very respectful toward our appointees. I was not part of the appointing process, but I trust that my fellow commissioners did go through a thorough vetting process. I have no reason to believe that it wasn't a completely open and transparent process and you did not, go through all the due diligence that I expect you would have to find the best candidates. Having said that, some serious allegations were made from very respected organizations. And when that happens, and there's a compressed timeline, and it wasn't agendized for our meeting on Wednesday, I feel like we had no choice except to call a special meeting and to do it as quickly as possible to try to get to the bottom of things. I feel like even though this meeting has taken a very long time, it has given us the opportunity to hear a lot of different perspectives. As President Bernhold said, there are clearly a number of recommendations that probably will emerge from our discussions. And, it's an opportunity to discuss those and to see, what can be done at this point. So I am not at all embarrassed. I think it's exactly what we should have done. We did it. We were respectful. They had an opportunity to explain, and everyone got to hear it. That is transparency. What I did hear was that there are concerns about transparency. Certainly the optics of the middle of the morning, early morning meeting is terrible, which it sounds like they were aware of. But it sounds like they had no choice. My assessment, having been through a breakneck speed kind of redistricting myself for the entire state, is that they did not allow themselves time to have a public input process that would allow them to have enough time to have the kind of conversation you need to come up with creative solutions. And unfortunately, their back is against the wall right now. There are a number of people who said that this deadline is meaningless, and that's not true. It is the law. It is in our charter. There's also a state law that requires all municipalities to turn in their districts by the 17th. I think it gives a couple of additional days. So while people think there's no penalty, there is. And the penalty would actually be for the department we have oversight over, which is the Department of Elections. So I think there are clearly opportunities to improve what's in the charter. When I think back at our process at the state level, when we had no agency and we had to create an agency from scratch and hire people and do the mapping and all the public outreach in the same amount of time for 4 different statewide maps, we at least had the advantage that in the Constitution, it said we had to have a draft map by June 15th. And I also remember we were proud of ourselves and congratulated ourselves that we had made that deadline. We thought we had such a great map, and then the tomato started being hurled. And so it is just unrealistic to think that you're going to get much meaningful public input before the public has something to react to. And I think that was a miscalculation by the redistricting task force. Maybe a lack of training, as a member of the public alluded to. I personally have trained local redistricting task forces from San Jose, Santa Clara, Berkeley, all throughout the Bay Area and elsewhere. And the first thing I told them is get a draft map out as early as you can, because you won't get reaction, you won't have meaningful public input, you won't be able to start to work with the public on what the solutions might be to understand the trade-offs in a really deep way, unless you give the public time to react, to analyze those maps, and to come up with alternatives that might be within the law. So I'm happy we had this meeting. I hope everyone in the public is happy as well. I personally believe that we do not want to be in the position of blowing up the independent redistricting process we have in San Francisco. I think removing any of our appointees at this late of a date risks doing that because we cannot possibly replace them. And even if we did, I'm not sure what the new people would be able to contribute unless they've been following every single meeting up to this point. I think I took it as a positive sign that Mr. Cooper told us that they are not done, that Reverend Townsend told us they are not done. They are working hard to make the map better. I think that they have a communication issue. I do think that if we're going to do a resolution that we might make some recommendations, not only to our appointees, but to the redistricting task force about explaining the rationale for their decisions. Because while you will not make anyone happy in a redistricting process, at least you can help them understand. And by giving them your rationale, you give them an ability to provide alternatives. You can't unlock the creativity of the public unless they understand why. And so those are my thoughts right now.
I just wanted to say thank you to all of you and to the public and to people who called in, who tuned in for this long, and just participated in this. I understand there were very strong opinions in many directions, but I think it's important to show grace to all those who participated. I echo several sentiments. I would like to speak for myself on a few of them, specifically the intention of the meeting today, because I'd like to elevate what you had said as it pertains to the agenda and the titling of the meeting, because I don't think anyone on this sitting up here intended for this to be some sort of judicial process of oversight where we then would vote to remove. I don't think that that was my intention, and that was not the conversation that I was privy to on Wednesday. And so I want to just clarify for the record that my intention was not to have that type of meeting today. I will say that I was disturbed by some of the things that I heard on Wednesday that were disappointing as a citizen. But they required us to listen. And I think that the importance of this conversation today, which I expressed to also the wonderful folks who participated, is that, and I echo this statement, I think someone else said, which is giving people a forum to express and defend themselves. I think the people who came to the meeting on Wednesday expressed that they felt there was a lack of clarity on why decisions were made. And so this was a space for those folks to come forward and say why they made the choices they made and to explain themselves, which they did. And I think that I am not embarrassed by that. I have a wise friend who shared, no matter what you do, and this is in a different context, no matter what you do at any point, you just have to be able to sleep at night. And I feel like I can go home and sleep at night knowing that we were listening to the public in every capacity that we could, and we are not here to be a judicial body that makes a choice of removal. It is just to provide information. I will say I I think they were also in a very tough position with COVID and the census data being released the way that it was, and Omicron, and I think we probably didn't even give enough attention to that component. And I think there are three last things I want to mention, which is I agree any decision or conversation around removal would be worse for the city and less democratic. I think that there are significant recommendations that should be discussed, potentially not during this meeting, but at the next conversation, pertaining to how we can improve transparency in that process generally. And I will say, I also think that incorporating the voices from the communities that expressed that they had not been listened to is important. And here, you know, specifically that our body doesn't even reflect San Francisco. I think that is a completely fair point that we should be taking very seriously. And we should listen to that and have a conversation about that. And so, yeah, I think that there was a lot of good that came out of today, despite it not being popular or and making anyone happy. So that's all.
There was, I actually was making a motion. I do appreciate President Bernholtz's, motion herself. The only challenge I have with that is, one, it's not enough because I think we have heard from the appointees, we've heard from the witnesses, we've heard taken countless hours of public testimony, and there is a finding of no malfeasance. And that's what this was. This was not just a meeting, right? You called witnesses. And it is not enough for us to, yes, the suggestion from, about removal, that came from the audience on Wednesday and also came, from council. That I didn't hear anyone here affirm that, although that's the way it was interpreted by the public. We can't just leave it at that because it's inappropriate. And what we're saying is inconsistent because we're saying both that the charter is silent on oversight, and yet we want to keep a short leash and oversee these task force members. That is inconsistent. So I think, with respect, my motion and incorporating some of the language from the president is that after hearing from the appointees, witnesses, and public commenters, we find as a commission no malfeasance. We applaud our appointees for their hard work, and we as a commission affirm the independence of the redistricting task force. That's my motion.
I second it.
Okay. So I think now we have to take public comment before a vote.
No.
No?
We already took public. Discuss the motion now too.
We can discuss it.
So on the question of whether we have oversight over the task force, I think my reading of the laws are that our appointees serve at our pleasure, but we don't have oversight over the task force. So I'm not sure if we have, how much jurisdiction we have over like dictating the process of the task force as a whole, but my reading was that we do have some level of responsibility in terms of our own appointees. But that's just the one comment I wanted to make.
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Jordanek. I think that the way that I read it is that we are an appointing authority, just like the mayor is an appointing authority, just like the Board of Supervisors is an appointing authority. And as an appointing authority, we appoint and we can withdraw, and our appointees serve at our pleasure. It's not actually necessary for us to find malfeasance. So, kind of in keeping with this wasn't intended to be a tribunal. It was intended to address the public's concerns and allow our appointees to address those concerns in a public forum, because some members of the public felt like they weren't getting that at the redistricting task force. And to address our oversight piece is our oversight over our appointees to, you know, make sure that we're still happy with our appointees because they serve at our pleasure. So I don't want to mix things that, you know, if we agree that we're just an appointing authority, then I don't want it to make it seem like we're more, you know?
I'll just say one thing where I want to affirm their independence as well. I feel that I am not a judge. I'm not here to like evaluate their misconduct or not. I am here to be independent. And if there is concern about whether or not there is misconduct, I don't think that that is our, I don't think that's our, I read the charter. I read through, actually I even read through the history of the commission earlier today as well, and how the task force operates. I just don't feel that we should be making positions about what act they believe or not. I don't know. I affirm their independence. I affirm they work extremely hard and that they should not be removed. I don't want to make a statement about something that I don't know enough about. It isn't to say that I don't respect their integrity and trust their integrity. It is, yeah.
President Bernholz, I think you raised your hand.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is where we're crossing wires or not, but as I hear Commissioner Jung's motion, it is a statement of what was learned today and a statement of affirmation for our appointees in the task force. Given what is legitimate confusion on my part, and I sense others as well as the public's, on oversight as an activity, what I'm wondering about is there was a great deal of very good ideas and information put forward here about how the task force could run for its duration, and also considerations both that directly go to our appointing authority 10 years from now, but also recommendations to the task force. I don't want to lose those. Now, they're on the public record. Members of the public and members of the task force have full access to them for the remainder of their period now. I actually feel that's sufficient. I do think we should somehow document those, and I would suggest that we just do that at another meeting, put that on the agenda and do that at another meeting as a way of responding to the extraordinary input we've gotten from the public, making sure it's available 10 years from now, and perhaps given the participation in this meeting of the clerk, it can join with the work that they're doing about the task force. That, I think, in my mind, decouples us giving active, or as someone said, holding a tight leash on the task force members or the task force when we're not clear we're in a position to do so. It simply documents what was learned and makes a better chance that the process will improve a decade from now. Is that how others understand this, or are I further muddling different things?
If I may, I agree with that. I think the tight leash comment, I just want to be very clear, was a color.
Yeah.
And no one on this commission ever suggested anything to that effect.
Okay.
Let me say one thing. Sorry, go ahead, President Bernholz.
Well, I think that's where I heard just now the confusion about, well, we can't offer guidance or, recommendations if we're not the oversight body.
Mhm.
And I agree with that. I don't think that's why I wouldn't, I'm strongly saying we don't modify the motion in any way. But there is a body of information that's been gathered that I feel strongly should be documented, archived, and passed on. So, but I think that's a separate thing, separate from this very unclear question. One of the recommendations is it should be clear to the public and the task force who oversees them, if anybody. That's an unanswered question in my mind. But
Yeah,
Commissioner Jones.
I completely agree with that, and also with some of the comments here, which is that I do think that this process would benefit from some process improvement recommendations, for sure.
Absolutely.
But that is not clearly within our authority, right? So I suggest that we take that up at a subsequent meeting, write those out. But we have a motion and a second, and let me just read what malfeasance is. Malfeasance is intentional conduct that is wrongful or unlawful. Intentional conduct that is wrongful or unlawful. Yes, nowhere in the charter does it set out the standard of what removal should be. But what we are saying here is that we may have unintentionally caused a little bit of harm, and we cannot just walk away without a finding. And we have heard from witnesses, we've heard from the parties involved, and taken countless hours of public comment. What we can say affirmatively is that based on those three things, we find that there is no intentional conduct that is wrongful or unlawful. That is malfeasance. And I think we need to make that affirmative statement, because intentionally or not, we have done harm. And not just to the public, which we have, but also to the three members of the task force. We should, I mean, I'll just speak for myself. I'm embarrassed, and none of you need to be, but I am personally embarrassed. And we need to correct that harm.
So can I just want to probe that a little more. What exactly are you embarrassed about? Is it the fact that we held the meeting at all, or is it clarity around the meeting's purpose, or is it the way we conducted the meeting, or what exactly are you embarrassed about?
I'm embarrassed that it was suggested by the public and then by the advice that we got, and we didn't do anything to clear up this notion that this was a meeting to potentially remove our appointees. None of you did. None of you did. So you can't just sit silent and say that, oh, it wasn't, we had something different in mind, because you didn't say it. And so, I'm guilty too. I sat there and all I did is said, I'm not available. You know what I should have said? What I should have said is that this is wrong, and that there's no way that without a fact finding that we're going to remove our appointees that took months and months to appoint. That's wrong. I'm sorry, that's wrong. And I'm not going to say any of you should be embarrassed, but I'm saying I'm embarrassed. That's what I'm embarrassed about.
I think you did say that we should all be embarrassed.
Okay, well, maybe I was telling the truth then.
I'm just saying, like, for the record, you did say that.
Mm-hmm.
I think we should have clarified it, and it was an error. And there was a lot of collateral damage from that. And I think you're right that we need to not just find that we are not removing them, but that we need to make an affirmative statement correcting that. Maybe saying there was no malfeasance is the right way to do that. I certainly feel that we did not find anything that warrants removal, period. And think, again, I agree. We are affirming the independence of the task force. And I guess, I think if we as a commission feel that saying those two things is enough to kind of correct what went wrong, then I'm comfortable doing that. I guess I pose to the, is that what we think would be the right action to correct what went wrong? I think, Mr. Jung,
That's my suggestion, yes.
yes, okay. I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with that.
If I may, commissioners, there's a live motion, so
we're discussing it.
you should just remember that also. But the the clerk of the board, Angela Calvillo, pointed out that there is a very minor oversight part that the Department of Elections does play for the redistricting task force. And so the very minor oversight is aspect that the department plays is on behalf of the task force, director of elections shall, subject to the charter's budgetary and fiscal provisions, retain any necessary technical consultants to assist the task force in its duties. So that, that is how the Department of Elections is involved, and, by extension, this is within your jurisdiction, because some of the commenters did make statements about the technical consultants that were hired. So I just wanted to point that out to you.
And I think that point goes to potentially making our recommendations at a future meeting and not to this motion. Fine. Okay.
I guess I'm just uncomfortable with talking about malfeasance because that implies we were considering that. And, the way it's stated in the charter is they serve at our pleasure. It is not necessary to find malfeasance. I think just a simple statement that we didn't find, any, actions or behavior that rose to the level of removal. We affirm the independence of the redistricting task force. It's probably sufficient. I guess I'm just uncomfortable inserting malfeasance into there because I don't think that was our goal today. I think for me, the goal was to give the public an opportunity to have their concerns addressed and to give our appointees an opportunity to address them. And I think we accomplished that.
How about this as a compromise then? After hearing from the appointees, witnesses, and public commenters, we affirmatively find that the appointees took no actions or engaged in behavior that would call for removal. So we avoid the word malfeasance.
I guess I'm also uncomfortable with the word witnesses. I mean, I feel like, we've had a lot of public comment. We had invited some speakers, but this is not a court proceeding. And, a lot of the, as is often true, a lot of the public comment was not totally accurate. We did not have 3,000 candidates for our appointees. So I think they're not. So I'm uncomfortable with using court language, I guess. I know you're an attorney, but I think we could say the same thing without using that, if you're comfortable with that. After hearing from the public and watchdog organizations.
Well, can I ask the Deputy City Attorney, when guests have been invited before and when I've testified, I've been referred to as a witness. Were these not witnesses? I know there was no swearing under oath, but I don't think that's necessary.
I believe that this is a policy decision for the commission to decide on. If you want to take the technical legal sense of this, I would imagine, and I may have to do some research on what witnesses means, but just off the top of my head from being an attorney in the criminal world and also in the civil world, usually witnesses are sworn. And nobody here was sworn. And so, you know, I can take a further research dive in the future if
I
you
don't
like.
think that's necessary.
I don't think we need that. Why don't we replace witnesses with invited speakers?
There we go.
Can you reread it?
Yeah, happy to. So this is the resolution after hearing from the Elections Commission's appointees to the redistricting task force, invited speakers, and public commenters. The commission affirmatively finds that the appointees took no actions or engaged in behavior that would call for removal, period. We applaud our appointees for their hard work, period. And we affirm the independence of the redistricting task force.
So I have a slight tweak to your language that I'd like to suggest, and you've made similar comments on this in the past about other topics when the commission has had to make findings. But like if we find that such and such, you know, blank, that makes it sound as if we can affirm that that's actually the truth. Whereas the tweak to the wording I would say is, we did not find that the commissioners, in other words, in what we heard today, we didn't find that. But we're not, because the thing is, I was not exhaustively questioning about things that might have happened, and you know, I don't know what they did for these weeks. You know, I'm just doing it based on what I've learned here.
Yes, and you know, that was an early comment that's evolved over time, and for that same reason, over time, for the 7 years that I've been on this commission, over time, what that has evolved into is us making affirmative findings of free, fair, and functional elections. My discomfort was, I don't know everything that's going on out there. How can I make such a finding? But that's what we've become comfortable with as a commission, because we are, as a commission, are entitled to make judgments based on what's in front of us. That's exactly analogous to the situation here. We heard from our invited guests, we heard from the invited speakers, and we took days of extensive comment.
Well, the difference is that determination is something that's spelled out in our charter. But in this case, only now am I hearing that was the purpose of questioning these people, because I was not asking them questions with the intent of making a later finding. You know, I think if that were the case, I would have been probably, you know, asked more questions or different questions. So I did not know going into this hearing that the intent was to create a finding to the effect that you're stating right now.
How would you suggest alternative language?
Can you read the sentence that contains the word find? I can suggest what I was as an alternative.
Resolved, after hearing from the Elections Commission's appointees, invited speakers, and public commenters, the commission affirmatively finds that the appointees took no actions or engaged in behavior that would call for removal.
So I would rephrase that to say that the commission did not find that the commissioners, and then continue.
Task force members.
I would be okay with that weasel language, and you know, that's a technical term. It's not a derogatory term. It's a technical term that lawyers use, but it's weasel language. I would be okay with that if this meeting had been conducted differently. But what my personal view is that we've done harm. We've done harm to these people, and we've done harm to this process. And we need to remedy that harm. And engaging in weasel language is not the way to do it.
Well, can I make a suggestion? When I do harm to someone, what I do in response is I apologize to them.
You want to apologize?
I think I think we could, yeah. I think we could apologize for the lack of clarity around the meeting. I think that would be one way of doing it. But
okay, I'm going to amend the motion then. Okay, after hearing from the appointees, invited speakers, public commenters, we make no finding of any action or behavior that would call for removal. We applaud our appointees for their hard work and apologize as a commission for our contribution to their suffering, and affirm the independence of the redistricting task force.
Well, so if I were to apologize for something, I'm not the one that set the agenda, but I would maybe apologize for it being being invited to an uncomfortable setting, or maybe apologize for lack of clarity around the purpose of the hearing, maybe.
We wanted to remove.
So I'm not. I'd like to hear what other people.
I think I would suggest reverting the resolution. And then we can think about how, I think the resolution needs to be done immediately to say that we have found there is no reason for removal. That is immediate. I think how we show contrition to these three individuals is something that maybe we should think about a little bit more as to what is appropriate. And that, to me, could be something we address at a future meeting, at the next meeting.
Then let me suggest a modification then to the motion. Then after hearing from the Elections Commission appointees, invited speakers, and public commenters, the Elections Commission finds no reason for removal. And then keep the others stay.
I like it.
Shall I repeat it one more time?
Please.
Okay. Resolved, after hearing from the Election Commission's appointees to the redistricting task force, invited speakers, and public commenters, the commission finds no reason for removal, period. We applaud our appointees for their hard work, period. We affirm the independence of the redistricting task force.
Yes.
So moved.
Question, do you want to say instead of hard work, just say they're public service? Do you want to?
No, I don't.
I think hard work's appropriate.
Okay. I don't have any.
Second that amended motion.
Okay. I think we've talked this out. We're agreed on language. DCA Flores, what's the next step? Is this the?
You have to vote.
Do we need public comment?
No, you already heard from the public.
Okay.
On the motion, though.
We're.
Either.
Okay.
Oh, I'll let DCA Flores speak.
You already heard from the public on this agenda item, so you do not need to hear from the public again on this if they want to.
Okay. Then I'm going to ask Secretary Delgadillo to call a vote.
Okay, President Bernholz, how do you vote?
Yes.
Vice President Chapel?
Yes.
Commissioner Dye?
Aye.
Commissioner Jordanic?
Yes.
Commissioner Jung?
Yes.
And Commissioner Shapiro?
Yes.
With 6 in the affirmative, the motion passes.
Okay. With that, I thank my fellow commissioners, I thank the members of the public, and I especially thank the redistricting task force and our 3 appointees. This mission is adjourned, or this mission.
Point of order. Do you have to take general public comment?
No,
No?
not at a special meeting.
Just checking.
No, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Willing to work.